The Galactic Federation had, over the course of 3,000 standard cycles, perfected the art of survival, which is to say, they had systematized it, bureaucratized it, and reduced it to a series of protocols that could be executed by anyone with a functioning neural implant and a basic understanding of emergency procedures. Survival, in the enlightened age of faster-than-light travel and matter reconfiguration, was less about actual surviving and more about waiting patiently for the inevitable rescue while consuming precisely calculated rations and maintaining optimal body temperature through thermal regulation suits. The Federation's 17-member species had all contributed to this magnificent doctrine. The Kavalesh, with their 4 arms and crystalline exoskeletons, had perfected the art of remaining absolutely motionless to conserve energy. The Thorian, floating gas bag philosophers that they were, had developed meditation techniques that could slow metabolic processes to near hibernation levels. Even the relatively physical Grax had mastered the dignified art of sitting still and complaining eloquently about their circumstances while doing absolutely nothing to change them. It was a beautiful system, really. Elegant, civilized, the kind of achievement that separated advanced spacefaring cultures from the primitive mud dwellers who still thought hitting things with rocks counted as problem-solving. Then the humans joined the Federation, and as with most things involving humans, everything went sideways in ways nobody had bothered to include in the contingency planning. To be fair, humans had seemed reasonable enough during the integration process. They had technology, art, literature, and only occasionally threatened to fight each other over tribal nonsense. Their planet was a disaster of competing weather systems and unnecessarily dangerous fauna, but they had somehow thrived anyway through what appeared to be sheer spite and an unwillingness to admit when they were beaten. The Galactic Council had run the standard assessments, determined that humans were probably fine, and welcomed them aboard the great cosmic community with the usual ceremonial exchange of star charts and cultural databases. What nobody had quite registered was that humans came from a death world where survival wasn't a patient waiting game, but an active, exhausting, full-contact sport that their entire species had been playing for hundreds of thousands of years. This oversight would become spectacularly apparent exactly 3 cycles after humanity's admission on a forgettable little moon called Theta Feather, during what the weather monitoring systems cheerfully classified as sustained precipitation events of moderate inconvenience. The humans would call it, "That time it rained so hard we thought the sky was personally angry at us." Theta Feather was supposed to be a routine survey mission, a mixed-species crew examining potential mining sites on a resource-rich moon that happened to have an atmosphere, liquid water, and storm systems that would make a hurricane look like a light drizzle. The survey ship Prosperity's Blessing carried a complement of 47 souls, 20 Kavalesh mineral specialists, 12 Thorian atmospheric analysts, 8 Grax structural engineers, and 7 humans who had signed up because the posting included a decent salary and the chance to be somewhere interesting. The universe has a sense of humor about these things. When the ship's main drive decided to catastrophically fail during orbital insertion, right as Theta Feather entered its biannual rain season, where the very concept of not raining became a distant memory, the crew had approximately 4 minutes to evacuate before the vessel's trajectory would convert them all into a very expensive crater. The evacuation pods worked perfectly, depositing the entire crew on the moon's surface in a relatively safe zone that the computers had identified as least likely to immediately kill everyone. The computers had not accounted for the rain. Oh, the glorious, endless sky-opening, ground-drowning rain. The pods landed hard in what might have been a forest clearing, or possibly just a slightly less dense part of the forest. It was difficult to tell through the sheets of water cascading from clouds that looked like they were auditioning for a disaster holodrama. The Kavalesh emerged from their pods, immediately activated their energy shields, and huddled together in a formation they had practiced during safety drills. The Thorian inflated their gas bladders and floated above the worst of the mud, already running calculations on optimal rescue timing. The Grax sealed themselves inside their pods and began the meditative breathing exercises that would sustain them through the ordeal. The humans climbed out of their pods, got immediately soaked to the bone, looked around at the torrential downpour, and one of them actually laughed. "Well," said the human who would become the central figure of this incident, a wiry female with the improbable name of Mackenzie Chen, "this is properly terrible, isn't it?" The Kavalesh expedition leader, Krishtek, flickered his translation implant to ensure he had understood correctly. "You find our predicament amusing?" "Not amusing," Mackenzie corrected, wringing water from her hair in a gesture that accomplished absolutely nothing given the continuing deluge. "Just familiar. It's like camping during monsoon season back in Southeast Asia, minus the spacecraft explosion, obviously." "The rescue beacon is transmitting," Krishtek announced, choosing to ignore the baffling human response. "Standard protocols indicate retrieval within 3 to 4 weeks, depending on available fleet positioning. We have sufficient rations for 6 weeks. We will maintain pod proximity, conserve energy, and wait. 4 weeks in this." Another human, a broad-shouldered male called Viktor Petrov, surveyed their surroundings with an expression the translator interpreted as either assessing or planning violence against the landscape. "In rain that could drown a fish. The protocols are clear," Krishtek insisted. "Survival situations require patience and minimal energy expenditure." Mackenzie exchanged glances with the other humans, and something passed between them that the alien crew members would later describe as deeply unsettling and probably conspiratorial. It was actually just the wordless communication of a species that had survived ice ages, predators, plagues, and their own worst impulses through a combination of stubbornness and the ability to look at any situation and think, "Yeah, but what if we just refuse to accept this?" "Right," Mackenzie said slowly. "Protocols, absolutely. We'll definitely keep those in mind." The rain continued to pour. The aliens settled in for their dignified wait. And the humans started doing that thing humans do when faced with uncomfortable circumstances. They started fixing them. By hour 6, the philosophical differences had become impossible to ignore. The Kavalesh had arranged their pods in a perfect geometric formation, sealed themselves inside with their ration packs and water recyclers, and begun what they called conservation meditation. The Thorian had tethered themselves to nearby trees and entered their low-energy floating state, looking like bizarre balloons anchored against the wind. The Grax had simply closed their pod doors and gone to sleep, their 4-chambered hearts slowing to a rhythm that would sustain them for weeks. The humans, meanwhile, had begun stripping branches from trees. "Explain this behavior," Krishtek demanded, emerging from his pod to find Mackenzie and Victor dragging what appeared to be small logs toward a clearing they had started, inexplicably, to excavate. The rain was still falling in sheets, turning the ground into a soup of mud that squelched obscenely with every step. "Building a shelter," Mackenzie explained, as if this were the most obvious thing in the galaxy. "Grounds flooding. Need to get elevated." "You have shelter." Krishtek gestured at the perfectly functional evacuation pods. "Federation certified, climate controlled, designed specifically for this purpose." "Those," Victor laughed, a sound that rumbled like distant thunder. "Those are coffins, tiny dark coffins where we sit in our own smell for a month. No thank you." They are survival equipment. Krishtek's exoskeleton flickered with colors that indicated confusion and growing concern. Designed by the finest engineers in the Federation, designed by people who've never actually had to survive anything, Mackenzie countered, examining a forked branch with the intensity of a jeweler inspecting a diamond. Your engineers think survival is about waiting to be saved. Where I come from, survival is about living until rescue shows up, not just existing. This distinction seemed to genuinely baffle Krishtek. What is the difference? One of them involves hot food and dry socks. Another human chimed in, a slender male named Jerome Washington, who was currently attempting to weave smaller branches into what looked suspiciously like a wall panel. The other involves slowly losing your mind in a metal can while eating paste and wondering if this is what death feels like. Over the next 3 days, while the aliens maintained their patient vigil and the rain continued its assault on the concept of dryness, the humans worked. They stripped saplings for poles, tested branch strength with the kind of empirical methodology that the Thorian would have admired if they weren't so horrified by the manual labor involved. They dug drainage channels around what was becoming a clearly defined construction site. They argued loudly about proper foundation techniques, weight distribution, and whether anyone actually remembered how to tie a proper lashing knot, or if they were all just making it up as they went. This is inefficient, observed Talzon, one of the Thorian analysts, hovering close enough to watch but maintaining what he clearly considered a safe distance from the madness. The energy expenditure alone violates every principle of survival efficiency. Mackenzie, currently waist-deep in mud, while driving a support pole into the ground, looked up with a grin that was equal parts exhaustion and something that might have been joy. Efficiency is for machines. We're surviving. You are playing in the mud like juvenile organisms. Sure, she agreed, but we're playing in the mud on purpose, which makes all the difference. The structure that emerged over the following days would have given a Federation structural engineer a complete systems failure. It violated approximately 70% of Dended building codes, existed in a state of cheerful defiance against several laws of physics, and yet somehow managed to not only stand but improve as the humans refined their design through rapid iteration and what they called seeing what works. The foundation consisted of 12 main poles, driven deep into the ground at angles that distributed weight in ways the humans couldn't quite explain mathematically, but insisted they knew were right, through some combination of intuition and cultural memory. These supported a raised platform approximately 2 meters above the ground, high enough to avoid the flooding that now covered the original landing site in a shin-deep lake of muddy water. They are using wood, one of the Grax engineers observed, having emerged from his pod to witness the construction. Unprocessed, unrefined, biological material that will decay and fail. On a long enough timeline, sure, Victor agreed, lashing another crossbeam into place with cordage the humans had somehow manufactured from stripped bark. But we're not building for centuries. We're building for a month, and wood is perfect for a month. The walls went up next, a combination of woven branches and broad leaves from the local flora that the humans had tested for toxicity by the scientific method of touching them and waiting to see if anything bad happened. The weaving pattern was tight enough to block wind and most of the rain, while allowing air circulation, creating a structure that breathed but protected. This violates the principle of minimal environmental impact, Talzon protested, watching as the humans harvested materials from the surrounding forest. We are instructed to take nothing from survey worlds. We're taking renewable resources from a moon that grows them faster than we can cut them. Mackenzie countered, fitting another wall panel into place. Look around. The forest isn't even noticing. But if you want to file a formal complaint about our environmental impact, be my guest. I'm sure the Federation will get right on prosecuting us for the crime of not dying in a rainstorm. The roof posed the biggest challenge, requiring a pitch steep enough to shed water while remaining stable in wind that occasionally gusted hard enough to make the Thorians' tethers strain. The humans solved this through trial and error, building test sections, watching them fail, adjusting the design, and trying again. The Coalish watched this process with something approaching horror. They are learning through failure, Krishtek observed. Repeatedly, intentionally. It's called iteration, Jerome explained, climbing down from the roof structure where he had been adjusting beam placement. You try something, see what breaks, fix the breaking part, try again. It's how you figure out what works when you don't have a computer to simulate everything. But the wasted effort isn't wasted if we learn from it, Jerome interrupted. Every failure teaches us something. That's not waste, that's education with immediate practical application. By day 7, the raised camp was complete. It featured a covered platform large enough to sleep all 7 humans with room for supplies, a roof that shed water like a professional, walls that blocked the worst of the weather while allowing ventilation, and a design that made aesthetic sense in a way that the purely functional Federation pods never could. It looked like something that belonged in the forest, something organic and intentional rather than metallic and temporary. The humans stood back, surveyed their work, and despite being covered in mud, soaked to the bone, and exhausted from days of physical labor, they smiled. Not bad, Mackenzie assessed. Now let's build a kitchen. The aliens, still sitting in their climate-controlled pods eating ration paste, wondered if perhaps humans had misunderstood the fundamental concept of what survival meant. The humans, meanwhile, were already scouting locations for the next phase of their project, discussing heat retention properties and draft management with the enthusiasm of people who had somehow forgotten they were supposed to be suffering. The rain continued to fall, the humans continued to build, and somewhere in the growing disconnect between these two approaches to adversity, the universe was taking notes. We need fire, Mackenzie announced on day 9, and the Coalish collectively experienced what their biology interpreted as an anxiety response. Fire is unnecessary, Krishtek insisted. Thermal regulation suits maintain optimal body temperature. Fire introduces unnecessary risk factors. Fire means hot food, Mackenzie replied, already selecting stones from a nearby stream with the intensity of someone choosing components for a critical piece of machinery. Fire means dry clothes. Fire means not feeling like a drowned rat, even though we're technically surviving fine. You just articulated that your current survival status is adequate, Talshon pointed out. Why introduce complexity? Victor, helping to haul stones back to the raised camp, laughed that rumbling laugh of his. Because adequate is not the same as good. You people really don't understand the difference, do you? The stove took shape over 2 days, and watching its construction was like observing someone practice arcane magic using only rocks and mud. Mackenzie selected each stone with careful consideration, testing for cracks, checking how they sat together, rejecting dozens for reasons she described as the wrong feel or bad heat distribution potential. The Grax engineers, despite themselves, found the process fascinating from a purely technical standpoint. The base went down first, a foundation of flat stones that would support the structure and insulate it from the wooden platform. Then came the fire chamber, built with an air intake at the bottom and a chimney structure that angled up and away from the shelter's roof. Mackenzie used clay from the stream bed as mortar, mixing it with grass fibers for strength in a technique that she claimed was thousands of years old, and still works perfectly fine. Thank you very much. The efficiency calculation is abysmal, Tolson observed, running numbers through his computational implant. The energy required to build this device, measured against the nutritional value of heated food versus the unheated equivalent, results in a net loss of what? Jerome interrupted. Calories. Sure, but what about morale? What about the psychological benefit of comfort? What about the fact that hot food makes you feel human instead of like a biological machine running on fuel paste? Psychological benefit is not calculable in survival metrics, Tolson insisted. Then your survival metrics are incomplete, Jerome replied, fitting another stone into place. Humans figured out a long time ago that surviving isn't just about keeping your body alive. It's about keeping your mind intact, your spirits up, your will to continue functioning. Hot food does that. Fire does that. Comfort does that. The chimney proved to be the trickiest part, requiring careful stone selection to create a draft that would pull smoke up and away without collapsing under its own weight. The humans debated angles, tested airflow with smoke from damp leaves, made adjustments, and argued extensively about whether anyone actually knew what they were doing, or if they were just pretending really convincingly. We are definitely pretending, Victor admitted. But we are pretending with good instincts and better pattern recognition. When the stove was complete, Mackenzie performed the ceremonial first lighting using a fire-starting method that involved a bow drill, friction, and an amount of patience that seemed at odds with the humans' usual frenetic energy. The aliens watched as smoke appeared, then a coal, then actual flame spreading to the tinder bundle she had prepared from dry materials she had somehow kept dry in a rainstorm. "It works," Krishtek said, his translator struggling to convey the mixture of disbelief and something that might have been respect in his voice. "Of course it works," Mackenzie replied, feeding small sticks into the growing flame. "Humans have been building fires since before we had language. This is literally in our bones." The smoke rose through the chimney, dispersed into the rain, and the first real warmth in over a week radiated from the stone structure. The humans gathered around it like moths, hands extended, and the sounds they made were somewhere between sighs and religious experiences. The aroma started on day 12, and it constituted a form of torture that the Federation had not anticipated including in their survival protocols. Mackenzie had spent the previous day foraging, carrying a datapad loaded with the survey team's biological scans of local flora and fauna. She returned with what she described as a pretty decent haul, including tubers that resembled potatoes, leafy greens that passed all toxicity screenings, and something that looked disturbingly like a six-legged rabbit that she had apparently caught in a trap woven from vines. "You are consuming non-ration food," Krishtek observed, his voice carrying a note of either concern or accusation, possibly both. "This violates protocols regarding unknown biological consumption." "Unknown to you," Mackenzie corrected, skinning the rabbit thing with a knife fashioned from sharpened metal, salvaged from the pod wreckage. "We scanned it. It's protein, fat, and nutrients in ratios that are actually better than your ration paste. No toxins, no dangerous compounds, perfectly edible. But the cultural preparation is called cooking, and it's how humans have been eating since we figured out that burnt food tasted better than raw food," Victor interjected, tending the fire with the attention of a parent watching a child. "Watch and learn." What followed was a masterclass in primitive cooking that the aliens watched with a mixture of horror, fascination, and growing hunger, despite the fact that they insisted they were perfectly satisfied with their ration paste. Mackenzie roasted the meat on a spit over the fire, the fat dripping and sizzling in ways that created smells the aliens didn't have cultural context for, but their biology recognized as nutrients in delicious form. She boiled the tubers in water heated in a hollowed stone, added the greens near the end, and seasoned everything with herbs that she had identified as safe and flavorful. The humans ate, and the sounds they made should have been classified as obscene. "This is incredible," Jerome mumbled around a mouthful of roasted meat. "How is this so good?" "Because we've been eating ration paste for almost 2 weeks, and our taste buds are throwing a celebration," Mackenzie replied. "Also, I'm an excellent cook." Obviously, the aliens remained in their pods, eating their nutritionally complete, perfectly balanced, utterly flavorless ration paste, and absolutely not thinking about the fact that the humans were clearly enjoying their meal more. Some of the Kavalesh started emerging from their pods more frequently, hovering near the human camp with the transparent excuse of monitoring the situation. "You are welcome to join us," Victor offered, holding up a skewer of roasted meat. "Scans say it is compatible with most Federation biologies. Might need some digestive enzymes, but it is food." Krishtek hesitated, his exoskeleton flickering through colors that indicated internal conflict. "The protocols say to survive until rescue," Mackenzie interrupted. "They don't say you have to be miserable while doing it. Come on, when's the next time you will get to eat actual cooked food prepared over an actual fire on an actual alien moon during an actual rainstorm? This is an experience." One by one, slowly the aliens approached the fire. The humans shared their food, explained their preparation methods, and for the first time since the crash, the entire crew sat together in something that resembled community rather than coordinated isolation. The rain continued, the fire burned, and the smell of cooking food drifted through the forest like a message that someone, somewhere, was refusing to merely survive when they could live instead. The rescue ship arrived on day 19, 2 weeks ahead of schedule, because the beacon's telemetry had started transmitting data that the Fleet Command interpreted as possibly indicating a critical situation requiring immediate intervention. The ship's commander, a Thorian named Velcroth, deployed his team expecting to find a standard survival scenario. Crew members in their pods, slightly malnourished, psychologically strained from extended isolation, but alive and functional within acceptable parameters. What he found instead made him recalibrate his entire understanding of the word survival. The landing site featured a raised wooden structure that looked more like a dwelling than an emergency shelter. Smoke rose from what appeared to be a functioning chimney. Clothing hung on lines, drying in the humid air. Something that smelled unmistakably like cooking food wafted from the camp. And the crew members, all 47 of them, were not huddled in their pods but gathered around a fire, eating, talking, and displaying every sign of being not just alive but thriving. "Report status," Velcroth demanded, his translator struggling to process what he was seeing. Krishtek stepped forward, his exoskeleton flickering with colors that indicated embarrassment, confusion, and something that might have been admiration. "All crew members alive and healthy. 0 critical incidents. Medical scans show the humans are actually in better physical condition than when we crashed. The Kavalesh, Grax, and Thorian crew members show acceptable health parameters with some nutritional improvements over standard ration-based survival." Nutritional improvements. "The humans taught us to cook," one of the Kavalesh explained, and the statement hung in the air like a confession of heresy. Velcroth floated over to the raised camp, examined the construction, the stove, the organized supplies, and the clear evidence that this crew had not merely survived, but had created a functional living space using nothing but local materials, and what he had to admit was impressive ingenuity. "This is not standard protocol." "No," Mackenzie agreed, stirring something in a pot that bubbled over the fire. "It is better. Want some soup before we pack up? It would be a shame to waste it." The rescue proceeded, but not before Velcroth insisted on documenting everything. The camp structure, the stove design, the food preparation methods, the water collection systems, the way the humans had transformed a survival situation into something that resembled, against all logic and Federation doctrine, actually enjoyable. 6 cycles later, the Federation added a new module to their survival training curriculum: adaptive resource utilization in non-standard survival scenarios, taught by humans who insisted on calling it camping. The Kavalesh still preferred their pods, the Thorians still calculated efficiency metrics, and the Grax still found the whole thing unnecessarily exhausting. But every Federation ship now carried supplementary survival guides written by humans who understood that surviving wasn't just about staying alive until rescue arrived. It was about living well enough that rescue felt less like salvation and more like an inconvenient interruption to a perfectly good camping trip. The protocols had been updated. Humanity had, once again, made the galaxy slightly more complicated and infinitely more interesting.